The first meeting is really a get-to-know-you meeting. We're going to sit down. Typically, the meeting will last about an hour. We're having a conversation. My job is to ask them some questions about where they are, what some of their goals are, what some of the key objectives they have in meeting with me, where they are to this point, and really what brought them in to see me. And now I'm at the point in my career where I have a lot of people that are dependent upon me to provide them with all the guidance and all the advice that we do on a day-to-day basis.
You spend your working years trying to build up your assets, trying to build up pension credits at your job, trying to grow your nest egg so that you can one day retire when you can't work or don't want to work anymore. And that's a period followed by phase two, which is retirement. And your priorities in these two phases are very different, but many times we see people don't make that shift and they still act like they're in phase one when they really should be acting like they're in phase two.
We're going to talk to you about what we commonly refer to as the second half of the game. And what I mean by that is you're working your entire life towards retirement, and I'm assuming that most of you are, at that age where you're starting to consider some of your options as you move into retirement. And as you do that, you're moving from what we call the accumulation phase of your life, where you're accumulating your assets. Maybe you're participating in your company's 401k, maybe you're contributing to an IRA account or a Roth IRA account or some type of retirement vehicle. And now, as you retire, you're transitioning into the distribution phase, or the part where you're going to need income in retirement. So we're going to talk about some different ways to do that with an emphasis on Social Security. Hello everyone, and welcome to Financially Speaking with Jeff Bush. My name is Jeff Bush and I will be the host for today's show. Today we're going to be talking about common beneficiary mistakes. Before I get into that, I just want to say that we're now entering into our second year here on PCTV, and the reason why we started to do this show on PCTV was not only are we getting the local flavor, the local coverage of being here on PCTV, but we also did it because we can spread our net on more of a worldwide basis, if you will. So our show is not only being shown here on the network, but it's also being shown on the PCTV network, which is the PCTVnetwork.com, and it's also shown on our website, which is informedfamily.com. So if you have people that maybe aren't in the local viewing area, but they want to look at our show. Maybe you've got a relative out in South Dakota or North Carolina. Introduce them to our website or to the PCTV website, and it's a good place to look at not only our current show, but we also have archived all of our past shows. And like I said, we're moving into our second year, so we're starting to build up a nice library of shows. With a lot of topics that are of vital interest and importance as we plan for our financial future. Today I want to talk about common beneficiary mistakes. This is vitally important. The reason for that is what I have found in my practice over the years is that a lot of assets aren't passed on to heirs through a will, through a traditional will. If you have a life insurance policy or an annuity, an IRA, or some kind of a qualified retirement plan, all of those vehicles require named beneficiaries. And those named beneficiaries supersede what you might be doing in your will. So today we want to take a look at beneficiary mistakes, common mistakes that we see people make, and really how you can avoid them. Before we get into that, I want to just sort of mention a story that was published in a New Jersey newspaper about 10 years ago, and it's called The Pension Pickle. And basically what happened is we have the Friedmans, Bruce and Ann Friedman, and they got married in 1978. They met on a blind date. Uh, 4 years prior to that, she was working in the New Jersey school system, and she named, before she met her husband, she named as beneficiaries her brother, her sister, and her mother as beneficiaries to her pension. When the Friedmans got married, they automatically assumed, well, since she's married, she has a husband, he's going to be the beneficiary of her pension. To further complicate the matter, the New Jersey teachers' pension system lost didn't lose, but didn't have on file the beneficiary designation. So when they got their statement, they said that there was no beneficiary. Okay, so when they got the statement and they saw that there was no beneficiary, they automatically assumed that Bruce would be the beneficiary since he's the closest relative. Well, when Anne died, this beneficiary document surfaced that named the 3 beneficiaries, her brother, her sister, and her mother. Well, her mother and her brother were already deceased, so that left her sister, who she hadn't spoken to in like over 20 years. But her sister was really the rightful beneficiary of that pension, and it was almost $1 million. So we call that the pension pickle, but it really, illustrates the need to name the proper beneficiary and do a periodic review of your beneficiary designations. What we do when we meet with our clients is annually we look at the beneficiary designations on all the accounts and make sure that they're up to date, because periodically we have to make changes. Some of the things that would warrant a change to a beneficiary would be things like a birth, a death, a marriage, or a divorce. All those things are life-triggering events that could determine who your beneficiary is on any of these accounts that we're talking about. So let's get into common beneficiary mistakes. So beneficiary mistake number 1 is naming minor children as outright beneficiaries. We see this a lot with young families. They name, maybe it could be a single parent, or it could be a situation where maybe even you have a grandparent. They want to name their grandchildren as beneficiaries. The problem with that is most states have limits on how much a minor can receive, and it's a pretty small amount. Usually it's in the neighborhood of about $5,000. So if you name a minor, so someone under the age of 18, as a beneficiary, they're probably not going to be able to take possession of those funds, and what's going to happen is there's going to have to be some legal action to take over. So there's going to have to be probably a trust established, a trustee of that trust. So a more likely solution there, if you want to have your children benefit, is you can put it directly into a custodial account for their benefit. Most states have what they call a UTMA account, Uniform Trust to Minors Act. You can put them right into the minors account. That way, they'll take possession of the money when they become the age of majority, which here in the state of Pennsylvania, by the way, it's 21 years of age. Okay, so you can just put it right in there. Or the other thing that we see a lot with our clients is they'll just name a trust as the beneficiary for the benefit of this minor, if the minor is under the age of 18. And it doesn't have to be a trust that you set up right away. It can be what we call a testamentary trust, which is a trust that's set up upon death. So if in the event that death occurs and you want the child to benefit, just set up a trust, and then the child can be the beneficiary of that trust. And then the trust can stipulate when the minor takes possession of those funds. So it doesn't even have to be the age of majority. It could be they could get a portion of it when they're 21, a portion of it when they're 25 and maybe a portion of it when they're 30 as an example. It could be used to pay college education, those kinds of things. So that's a common mistake that we see, naming minor children as outright beneficiaries. Let's move on to beneficiary mistake number 2. Beneficiary mistake number 2 is failing to name a beneficiary or naming the wrong beneficiary to your retirement plan. If you fail to name a beneficiary, you name the estate as the beneficiary, it can cause all sorts of problems. If you have a retirement account like an IRA or 401k plan and you're married, the best thing to do is to name your spouse as the beneficiary. If you name your spouse as your beneficiary, then when your spouse inherits the account, they can simply step into your shoes and make it a spousal IRA. And then they can just continue with all the benefits that you had with this retirement account while you were living. And when I say benefits, I'm talking about the tax benefits that reside inside of a retirement account. So with a retirement account, you can keep that money in tax deferral until you're age 70 and a half. And you're at age 70 and a half, then you have to start taking what we call required minimum distributions. But up until that time, you can keep it in deferral. So if you're inheriting an account from a spouse, you can just put it into your own name and continue the tax deferral, and you don't have to take any distributions until you reach the age of 70 and a half. So that's probably the most important thing with regards to naming a beneficiary if you're married. Naming your spouse gives your spouse the right to continue the account in tax deferral, and they simply step into your shoes and get the same rights that you have with that account while you're alive. Now, if you don't have a spouse and you want to name your children as the beneficiary, you'll want to name them as the primary beneficiary to your IRA. The reason why you want to do that is because what that allows to happen is for the IRA account to go into deferral really for another generation. So let's say you're 70 and you pass away and you've named your child as the beneficiary and they're maybe in their 40s, let's say they're 45 years old, they can stretch that IRA out over the course of their lifetime. So they might have another 40 years of life left, and they can stretch that IRA out. We call it a stretch out IRA. You stretch out the IRA over the course of their lifetime. Now, what will have to happen is they'll have to take required minimum distributions. The IRS will require them to take a required minimum distribution. But at age 45, we're looking at a pretty small percentage. We're probably looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 3% that they'll have to take out. And the rest of it they can keep into tax deferral. It's a very powerful strategy. So what you want to do is name your spouse as your beneficiary if you have one, or if you don't have a spouse, you want to name your children as beneficiaries. Now, if you have a spouse and children, what you want to do is you want to name your spouse as primary beneficiary, and you want to name your children as contingent beneficiary. We often see people miss that step as well, because a contingent beneficiary is important, because if you've named a primary beneficiary and that primary beneficiary has predeceased you, then the amount by default will go into your estate. Okay, so naming your children as contingent beneficiaries is really critical here. A good rule of thumb is you always want to name a contingent beneficiary, because there's always a chance that your primary beneficiary is going to die before you do, or in the case of a spouse, you could die in a common disaster. Okay. The other thing to remember here, if you miss this step and the IRA goes into your estate, the estate is going to be subject to much higher taxes than individuals. Assets will now become subject to probate, which can be a long, cumbersome, and expensive process. So probate can last up to 2 years or longer, depending on what's involved in settling the estate. If there's real estate, if there's other assets that we can't liquidate quickly, it could take a while to settle the estate. As opposed to having a named beneficiary on your IRA, that can be settled pretty quickly. So you want to avoid probate because of the expense, the time that's involved with settling an estate through probate, and also the fact that if we're taxing the income from that IRA to the estate, you're going to accelerate into a tax bracket much higher than if you're being taxed as an individual. Plus you lose the tax deferral. If an IRA goes into an estate or as part of the probate process, we're probably looking at most a 5-year deferral on the IRA as opposed to a lifetime deferral if you're naming the beneficiary directly. Let's move on to beneficiary mistake number 3. Beneficiary mistake number 3 is naming a trust as a beneficiary. Why don't we want to do that? Well, the assets have to be paid to a trust within 5 years, okay? I always use the analogy of what the I stands for in IRA, and that stands for individual. An IRA account has to be owned by an individual. It has to be somebody who's living and breathing. It can't be owned by a trust. So if you've named a trust as a beneficiary, then what happens is that the trust has to be dissolved and paid out over 5 years and taxed at the trust rate of tax rather than being taxed as individuals. And just to give you an example of that, with a trust, you accelerate up into the 35% tax bracket pretty quickly in a trust. It's probably somewhere around $11,000 or $12,000 of income to a trust, and you're being taxed at 35%. To reach the 35% tax bracket as a married couple, you're looking at income in excess of $300,000. So there's a huge difference in the way income to a trust is taxed versus how income to an individual is taxed. Plus, it's expensive to establish and maintain a trust. Now, there are reasons why you would have to name the trust as a beneficiary. Like if you have a special needs situation where the dollars have to go into a special needs trust, then that would be a legitimate reason why you would name a trust. But again, you're going to have a lot of expense to establish and maintain that trust. But in the case of a special needs trust, you have to do that because it's the only way someone with special needs can get that money and not have it hamper their ability to get income from Social Security, Social Security, disability, or Medicaid situation. Okay, so about a third of it can be lost to taxes if that money goes into a trust because of the high tax rate that is incurred by the trust. Okay. So to prevent making this mistake, you want to consider naming a natural person as a beneficiary. So spouse, children, sister, brother, all of those are good examples of people that you can name as beneficiaries. But again, if you have any kind of a document where there's a named beneficiary, so that would be a life insurance policy, an annuity, an IRA, or any kind of a retirement plan that you would have at work, all of those plans require that you have named beneficiaries. So you want to name natural people as beneficiaries whenever you can in those situations. Common mistake number 4 is the per stirpes versus per capita quandary. So we We don't really want to get into a Latin course here today, but we're going to talk about what per stirpes means and what per capita means, and the important difference when naming beneficiaries. So quite simply, per stirpes means that you're following the roots of the tree. Per capita means capita means head, so it's per head. So let me give you an example of what that means. So let's say that you have 4 children, okay, and you name them as beneficiaries. So when you die, each child is going to get an equal share. They're going to get 25%. Now let's say that each of your children each have 2 children of their own. Okay, so you have 8 grandchildren, let's say. Now, if you put in your beneficiary designation that you want these assets to pass to your children per stirpes, it means it's following the roots of the tree. It means it's following the family. So let's say you have a son who's predeceased you. So you have a son, John, he's predeceased you, and John has 2 children of his own, your grandchildren. In the case of a per stirpes designation, what will happen is John's share will simply go to his 2 children. It'll follow the roots of the tree. So John's 25% share will be split evenly between his 2 children. So they'll each get 12.5% of whatever the value is of the account. So let's say it's a life insurance policy. So if let's say it's a $100,000 life insurance policy, John's share would have been $25,000. Since John predeceased the insured, then John's share will simply follow down to the roots of the tree, and it'll go to his 2 children. His 2 children will each get $12,500. So that's per stirpes. And I would say that in my practice, that is the most common designation, a per stirpes designation. Let's talk about a per capita designation. What a per capita designation does is it doesn't follow the roots of the tree. In other words, the benefit goes sideways. Let's go back to the example of having 4 children, John being 1, and John predeceasing the insured. So if we have a per capita designation, which, by the way, that's the default designation. The per capita designation is the default designation. So in this case, if John is predeceasing his parents with a per capita designation, his benefit will simply revert to the other 3 beneficiaries, the other 3, his siblings, his brothers and sisters. So if there's a $100,000 benefit, since John has already died, the other 3 siblings will simply absorb 1/3 of the share instead of absorbing 1/4 of the share. So in this example, they would get $33,333 instead of getting $25,000. They would simply inherit John's share. That's a very important distinction here, because in that example, when we're using a per capita designation, John's family gets no benefit there. It's simply the money, I call it going sideways, because it's really going to the other beneficiaries, his brothers and sisters in this example. But having said that, it's a personal choice. It's really a choice of the individual making the beneficiary designation. I also want to add that in most cases, beneficiary designations are revocable. So what that means is you can change them whenever you want to as the owner of that contract. So if you own that life insurance policy, you can change your beneficiaries whenever you want to. So if you want to take John out of your will because he did something to upset you, it's your right to do that. you can revoke the beneficiary. You can change your beneficiary and put someone else in there. But you want to be careful. You want to make sure that you're using the proper per stirpes or per capita designation. So it might be a good idea to go back and look over your beneficiary designations. Now, we're offering free today a copy of our white paper, which is Common Beneficiary Mistakes. So some of the things that we talked about here, we have them in written form on our white paper, and it's Common Beneficiary Mistakes. You might want to just include that with your important papers. Maybe it's stimulate some discussion with your children. But if you want to get a copy of our white paper, you can do that by contacting our office. You can use our email address, which is info@informedfamily.com, or you can simply give us a call at our phone number, which is listed up on the screen. And give us a call. We'd be happy to get the white paper out to you free of charge. I also want to mention our website is a very valuable resource. In addition to having our TV show here today being shown on our website, I also keep a blog, which every week I put an update on the website with a blog of something that's very important and very pertinent to a financial plan. So you can just go onto our website every so often and you can see, okay, well, what's the blog about this week? And then, of course, if you have any further questions about that, you can always send us an email. We do periodically seminars in the local area, and we're going to put the seminars we have coming up. We have a relatively new location right down on High Street here in town, Connections on High. We'll be there in a couple of weeks. And also we have one coming up at the Franconia restaurant at the Family Heritage. Also, our office location is right downtown at 152 East High Street. It's on the corner of High and Hanover Street. So we're right here in town. We've been doing this show for over a year. We love doing it. We love getting the response that's come through from our viewers. And it's been a pleasure to be with you today to talk about common beneficiary mistakes. And we're going to sign off, and we'll see you next time here on Financially Speaking with Jeff Bush.